much. Thanks for inviting me, Sandra. Thanks for organizing everything. I am technically an obstetrical anesthesiologist. I work at the Brigham and Women's Hospital for about 20 years before I moved over to the Mass Eye, but I'm largely an administrator now. I largely do change management. I largely manage the hospital staff. And it's really interesting because I think anesthesiologists have a really unique role in hospitals, but it's really up to us to grab it because you can't be passive. If you're passive, no one's going to hand it to you. You have to really go out and get it. I'm going to talk about change management, and it's going to be a completely different sort of talk than what you've already been hearing. And I want to have a little bit of fun. I hate to stand between you and lunch. I will finish in 30 minutes if that's okay. Are we okay at that? Or do I need to go faster? 30 minutes is okay. It's really simple because I tried to take, what does change management look like, which is really complicated, and try to distill it down to just the framework in the next 30 minutes. So I want to have a little bit of fun. I want to get your participation a little bit if I can, and talk about what it takes to make change happen. And I'm talking about change in a larger scale than what you might think about, but you can really apply the same principles to changing something in your home. So it could be very small scale as well. And I've taken everything I've talked about here, I've taken from these three sources. So John Cotter is sort of the guru of change management. He's a Harvard Business School professor who probably has written the most and probably had the greatest influence on change if you look at not healthcare but businesses across the board. Switch is a really easy, fun book to read about change management. It talks about change management in your life as well as large corporations. And it largely employs the same principles of Cotter's. Cotter's is more of a textbook-like read, whereas Switch is like a popular book to read. So it's really easy. If you're going to read one, I would read Switch because it tells you the same things but in a really nice format. And the Joint Commission, which is our largest accreditation service in America, and I think they do a lot internationally as well now, also has a change management format, which I've done. It's a 3-day course. And so I've taken all these things and I've turned it into 30 minutes for you or 25 minutes. So it's also really good to think about what is change when we talk about it. I think everyone kind of knows it, and everything I do the goal is to make it really simple because that's the way I understand things. So change is really simple, right? It's to become different as a person or yourself, to make someone or something else different, or to become something else. And you can imagine in all of your environments that it could be any one of these things that you're trying to do. So if you're really trying to change in the entire country how OB anesthesia is viewed, that's a really big change. If you're trying to change it in your unit, how you want to cover anesthesia cases on the labor and delivery floor, that's still a pretty big change, but considerably smaller. I'm trying to apply the principles to both of those scenarios. If you're trying to change your spouse to have them do something, you can use the same principles. So here's the formal process, and I'm going to run through sort of an 8-step process. This is from Cotter. And I'm going to try to run through each of these relatively quickly so you get an idea of what it means to actually change something. So the most important thing, I think, as we start off is you have to really think about what it is you're trying to change and what it is that you're not trying to change, and really be clear about it. And when you think about changes, I think that there are these sort of important things that we put on the table right away. We often, particularly as physicians, but everywhere, look at change intellectually. And when we look at the intellectual part of it, it is really important, but you can't forget the emotional part of the change. Otherwise, you're going to fail. So the intellectual part of change is, what's the data to say that you have to have OB anesthesiologists on the floor? What's the data to say that OB anesthesiologists make a difference? But that's often not enough to make the change. So if you're going to go try to talk to governments or try to talk to people about what you want to do, you have to bring the emotional part of that into the story. And what's the emotional part? You have to tell the patient's story. You have to talk about the death. You have to talk about the patient suffering, right? Otherwise, you don't make that emotional connection and you won't be able to get that change. It's the biggest mistake that we make in change management is that we take on the logical, intellectual part, but we don't take on the emotional part. And if you don't take on the emotional part, you lose. This is a big part of the Heath brothers' book, is they use this analogy of an elephant and a rider. And they say that when you talk about the emotional and the intellectual part of change, the rider is the intellectual part of change. The elephant is the emotional part of change. And they say, who wins? Is it the rider that's actually in control, or is it the elephant? Which one's in charge? Who's really in charge there? When the rider is in control and they've got the leash on and they've got a big whip in their hand and the elephant sees a little mouse, the rider loses, right? It's the same way we think about it when we think about change that we forget. If you're trying to lose weight, or for me, I have high cholesterol and I'm on a statin and I know I shouldn't eat the ice cream and the cheese that I really love. Maybe it doesn't make a difference. And I work really hard at it. I'm really good at it. But then I have a really bad day or a rough day at work, and I come home and I eat the ice cream, right? Because it's the emotional part that often wins, and you have your own stories about how we do that. Don't forget about the emotional part. I love this. Do you guys have Avon? Do you know Avon, the cosmetic company? No. Okay. I don't know. Clairol? I don't know. What's a big cosmetic company here? Max Factor, okay? This is... Avon is a really big cosmetic company, and look at the ad here. They really sell to women, right? What are they trying to do? I need your participation here. What is Avon trying to do with this ad? They're trying to hit an emotion, but what are they hoping to accomplish with the emotion? That's right. That's right. You're absolutely right. Do they care about domestic abuse? Well, maybe they do care. I don't want to be completely pessimistic. But you're right. They're trying to get you to buy their product, right? Because it's hard to differentiate when you go to that drugstore and you look at 3 different lipsticks or 5 different lipsticks. Why do you want to choose Avon? Because that's emotionally connected with you. It isn't logical. It really works, though. It really works. Advertisers are really smart about it. Now, I don't want to take it back. They do care about domestic violence. I'm not trying to downplay that. But they're a corporation who's in the business to make money, and they know that if they want to change behavior at the counter, they've got to hit you on the emotion. Remember that as you're going through it. The other thing that I think you guys brought up a lot today, which was great, is that if you don't have a sense of urgency to make the change, you're not going to make the change. And so when we talk about, in America, anesthesiologists changing to perioperative physicians, if things were great for anesthesiologists, they're not going to change. And so one of the things that we have to do whenever we try to make a change is that you have to create a sense of urgency. You have to make that sense of urgency evident to the people that you're trying to change. Otherwise, you get complacency, and complacency does not lead to change. It actually fights change. So if you don't have that visible crisis, so I spent a lot of time implementing surgical checklists in the operating room. I went to about maybe 75 hospitals in order to do checklists. Do you have checklists in your operating room? Intraoperative checklists are very common, right? It was really hard to get people to change because if you go to any given physician or an obstetrician, we do checklists in our labor and delivery area as well as in our ORs before C-section, they will tell you that I've done 1,000, 5,000 C-sections or operations, and I've never made that kind of mistake. And the challenge is that you have to show them that good for you, you've done one, you've got 0 and 5,000, I'm going for 0 and 100,000. You've got to show them the reason to change. If you don't give them feedback that makes sense, that also hurts you on the change, right? Hand washing, we're horrible at hand washing because people don't connect what they're doing today with the infection that comes a week later or 2 weeks later. You've got to show them the evidence, you've got to feed them back. Low performance standards are tricky because no one wants to acknowledge that they aren't doing a good job in their hospital. And so when you've got a large legacy or a long time legacy of doing it a particular way, you need to bring in outside standards to show people there's a much better way to do this. We can't get accustomed to this low performance standards. We can't get used to the fact that women demand labor and they have to wait an hour and a half to get it. That isn't fair. It's not okay. You have to change that standard. I love the question of what women want in labor and delivery because I wanted to raise my hand and answer that, but I thought as a man to answer what women want is always a little bit dangerous. But we live in that world. And I think what women really want is that they want safety. We take that for granted, I think. But what they want is they want to know that they're going to be supported, that they're going to be informed, and even if they choose to make a decision that you wouldn't make, that you're going to support it. And I think that's the hard part for us as anesthesiologists, is to deliver that. So when women want analgesia, you got to give it to them. You can't hold it back. Your system has to support that, right? The low performance standard is saying 2 hours is okay. We've always done it that way. That isn't okay to do that. You know, they used to bite on bullets before they did amputations in the Civil War. It isn't okay when we have other technology to do that, to say that way. The other part, we talked about young staff coming on board and old staff that have been here for a long time. It goes along with the low performance standards that you've got to move people forward. It's really hard, and you've got to tackle the people that are the sort of filibusters that don't want to change, because change is really hard. I think inducements and threats don't work as well as people think they do. That is that you have to emotionally move them and logically move them along by paying them more or threatening them more. You know, it has a place, but it's not enough. You've got to convince them up front that this is important. That's much more powerful than trying to pay them to do something. And it's really, really hard. Change is hard. You got to acknowledge it right from the beginning. All right, number 2. These are the 2 longest ones, sorry. Is you got to find your change group. So that initial organization that you put together to manage change winds up being critical. I use a rule of thumb that you need a square root of the number of people that you're trying to change to be in your group. So if you have 100 people that you're trying to change, you've got to get 10 people at least on your group to change it. If you've got 625, you need 25. If you need 1,000, you need 30 or more. Right? It gives you a rough idea of how many people you need. But you got to have these critical people to play this role. Now, if you're trying to change 5 people, one person can play 2 or 3 roles. If you're trying to change your husband, you can play all the roles yourself. But you got to think about what that is, or your wife. So you got to have key stakeholders. That means that you got to have people that this matters for. For OB, it would be you got to have women. You got to have women that have gone through labor and delivery. You've got women who've thought about going through labor and delivery. You've got to have obstetricians. You've got to have male and female obstetricians. You know, you know what the epidural rate is for female obstetricians? It's really high, right? It's over 90%. So why is that? I mean, there could be lots of reasons for that, but you got to have the right stakeholders in there. And then you've got to have leadership. You've got to have people that are really influential and have the position in your organization to be able to make the change. And then you've got to have influence leaders who are not leadership position holders. These are the people that really make a difference in a particular organization, but they don't have a particular position. Those wind up being just as important as the people that have the leadership roles. And then you have to have frontline people that really understand what's going on. So if I'm going to get involved in an OR management change or a hospitalist change or an obstetrician change, I can't do it. I've got to get the people that are involved to do that in there. I love this. Do you know why this is here? For developing a vision or strategy. Do you know what that is? What is that a picture of? It's an elevator, right? So you need to be able to tell your story in an elevator. That is, it's an elevator pitch, right? You've got the distance between getting on in the lobby and going up to the 10th floor of your hospital or 3rd floor. You've got to be able to tell your story. I love this. This is a Joint Commission piece, is that ideally, can you get your vision down into 15 words? And it's really a fun challenge to do. And so when you have that group of people that are part of your leadership team that you're trying to change, you have to get, this is a great little exercise. Every little one of these has an exercise. I'm giving you one example of it just to show you what the change management piece is. So if there's 10 of us in a room trying to create a vision, you want to get all 10 of us to independently write down what we're trying to do, and you want to do it in 15 words or less, 16, 17, whatever you think in that time. And then you want to take all of them, write them up on a board, and find the common themes that are there. And you'll find people are, you know, even in your little group of change management, you'll find people that have really different ideas. And you've got to bring them together. You've got to talk about them right there. Because if the 10 of you aren't organized, you're never going to be able to get out there and give that message. And you've got to give that same message to everyone over and over again. The other thing about change, and this is also from the Heath brothers really, really emphasize it, is you have a really big global goal or vision about the change. So you want to, I know, it may be that you want to bring, every labor and delivery unit is going to have an OB anesthesiologist in-house 24/7. That is a great vision for, I don't know what in Holland, maybe it would be 2025. But what's the next step? What's your goal for the next year and the year after that? Make the small steps. Show people what they need to do, step by step by step, because sometimes that vision is too far away and they can't do that. And many times when you see resistance to change, it is that people may not understand what the small thing is, the small step is that they need to change. So show them the steps along the way to make that happen. And you can't communicate enough. Once you start rolling things out and talking about it, you have to think about communicating in every possible medium that you have, whether that's video, whether that's posters by the elevator, whether that's every staff meeting you're going to start, or every leader is going to start by talking about whatever it is that you're trying to change. For us, when we did the surgical checklist, it was every staff meeting, every surgical division leader at the Brigham and Women's Hospital was going to start by talking about where we were on the process for implementing the surgical checklist in the OR. And you got to do it over and over and over again. And be creative about the way you communicate, right? Just like that Avon commercial, you got to be smart about it. I'm going to take a little pause here and ask. It seems like we have a bunch of people that are interested in change. How many people here? I'm going to have you to raise your hand because I know I can see the hypoglycemia setting in. How many people here have other people come to them for advice? You don't have anyone come to you for advice? I feel bad for you. So I think just about everyone raised their hand, right? And when they come to you for advice, what do they want? Are they looking for a solution from you because you have that expertise? I'm going to tell you that, pardon me? Not always. What else are they looking for? Reassurance. Belonging. A sounding board. So what, pardon me? Sparring partner, right? A coach of some sort. I'm going to tell you that 90% of the time when people come to you in your position even of leadership, and they come to you and ask for advice, maybe 80%, they don't want your advice. They want you to listen, right? Have I changed your mind about that? The next time someone comes to you, are you going to be able to resist giving them advice? You're not sure yet, right? Let me show you something. All right, did I go a little bit further in convincing you that listening is really important and not giving advice is really important? I get caught in the gender issue here that it happens to be a man and a woman in those roles, but I can tell you it could be just the opposite. It could be the man coming to the woman and doing that. And I think, honestly, my wife has been trying to do this with me for probably 20 years. Just listen. But this video changed my life because that little story of seeing it, and now I try it. And I'm in a role where people come to me with their problems all the time. And I can see the nail in the person's head when they come in. And I know what we have to do is just pull it out because I don't know if you heard, but her sweaters were getting snagged all the time and she couldn't figure that out. And I will just pause and I will say, what do you want to do? Do you want to try to come up with a solution or do we just think about it for a little bit? And I am amazed by the number of times people just say, you know what, I feel pretty good. Let's just think about it and come back again next week and talk about it. I put that up there because I think that the way, that's emotional and that's communicated in a way that we're not accustomed, but that's the way we make change. I show this video to all the residents. We talk about change management. We talk about communicating. I show it to all my staff. I've had it at staff meetings. Everyone sees this. We've become much more sensitive in my workplace as a result. All right. Obstacles are like a way of life. I'm going to switch back to our change management. There are going to be obstacles in the way. The first thing you do, I don't remember if I have a slide. The first thing you do is you want to anticipate that you have those obstacles. You want to get that group of people. You want to go out, talk to isolated individuals across the way, and ask them, what are the things that are in the way? What do you anticipate will get in the way of us moving this forward? And try to take care of those before you actually start. The second thing is that you have to be prepared that there are going to be unexpected things along the way, and you might have to change course. The idea is don't forget where you need to be. The way you get there may have to be different. You may have to go around that boulder, but don't give up with your idea. And you got to be persistent. I loved actually the slide that, Sandra, you put up, which is, there's like, it's raining. That's a much better slide. I like that. I took a picture of it. I'm going to steal that from you sometime, because that is really the case, right? You're going to have obstacles in the way. It's part of change management. You got to love that almost, and almost love that challenge. It's also okay to identify that people can be obstacles, and you have to go find those, and you know who they are in your workplace typically or in your organization, and you can't run away from them. You got to go take them on right from the beginning, and then you can make a decision. So when I'm going to keep talking about the checklist because it's really easy, but you could talk about any change management piece, is that we knew that our thoracic surgeons were going to be very, very difficult. We knew that our orthopedic surgeons were going to be easy. From an anesthesiologist point of view, and I was running this change to put our 50 operating rooms and our, every one of our specialty services onto the surgical checklist. And I went and talked to the thoracic surgeons, and I could see they were going to be difficult. All right, when we did our rollout, we moved them towards the end because I wanted to get the wins in beforehand. And you have to have these short-term wins. You have to be able to tell people, look, we rolled it out in orthopedics, and 95% of our orthopedic cases are now using the checklist. Here are the things that we have found, that the antibiotic administration is actually going in before. This is a great statistic. Our Medicare services, our federal government said that antibiotics as a standard needed to go in 1 hour before incision. Do you have such a standard in your country to reduce surgical site infections, right? So our rates were up at 99% or 100% very, very quickly because we had to publicly report them. After we implemented the checklist, this was like 5 years later, right? Our surgical site infections started to go down. Why would that be? Why would it be that we had 100% compliance on our antibiotic administration, and this is not just at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, but across the country, that when you implemented the surgical checklist, your surgical site infection rate went down? What would the reason be for that? But we had 100% compliance or 99% compliance.
How was that measured?
You would just document that you gave it before. The nurse would document it. They would ask, did you give the antibiotic? Yep, yes I did. Yeah, you lied. I mean, I hate to say that, right? I've asked anesthesiologists, I'll tell you that I have lied in the operating room. When I have groups of anesthesiologists, I said, have you ever lied in the OR? And if you're really honest, you would say yes, unless you feel really comfortable in the OR. What do you lie about? When the surgeon asks if you've given the antibiotic, you say, oh yeah. And then you quickly grab it and you sign a, right? We can be honest. We're mostly anesthesiologists. Mostly. I don't want to tell our obstetricians all of our secrets. But the truth is what that did was it changes the culture in the operating room that you can actually say, because we all understand that it's important. And we can say, oh my gosh, I forgot. And I'm safe and I'm okay doing that. And I can pause. I'm sorry. I won't do this again. And I grab my antibiotic and give it, or I have to go grab it, right? That's what changes, right? That's what change is when you can do that. And you need to be able to say those kinds of things out loud. Whatever you catch, you want to advertise it, show them that you're moving. And then when you've got 90% of the OR on board, you go back to the thoracic surgeon and the surgical service, and then you put the statistics down, and you show thoracic surgery, 10% compliance, right? You want to embarrass them. But you've got to have enough of those wins to do it. The other thing that's really hard is that once you start moving and you start doing this, then all the new people that you bring on board, those new residents, fellows, whoever you're hiring, you've got to make that the baseline, that you redefine that standard, that this is the way we're going to be now. That consolidation of gains, making sure you put people in the right place, that you move people out, this is the time that you do it once you've already implemented and shown that. And then you've got to show the results, you've got to put them out there, and then you just change the baseline of where you are. Yeah. We don't have OB anesthesiologists in our hospital every night, but they're all here within 30 minutes. That's our goal the first year. Or we're not going to do OB in hospitals that have less than 500 deliveries. Whatever that is, you take those small steps, you advertise it, and then that becomes the baseline so that you never go back from that. You set the standard there, you raise that line, you raise that bar, and you keep doing that. That's how you anchor the change so that it doesn't fall back. For the surgical checklist, the way you did it is that not only did you have to implement it, but then you have to go back and make sure that it's continuing to be done because people can slip and fall back on it. People often say that, don't we have to change the culture before we do something like this? And I actually have a different perspective on culture. I think that the way that you actually change culture is by making change and showing that you can do it and going through this process, and then people start thinking about, this is the way that we are. Because culture is the way we behave, right? The way we act, the way we actually carry out our mission. And it's hard to do that in and of itself. The way that you do that is actually implementing change and going through this process as a team, and then your entire environment changes. So you change culture as a result of the way you manage change. If I'm going to leave you with one thing around this, or maybe two things I'll say, is get your team together early on and think about what you're trying to do. And then don't forget about the emotion. It's the emotional part, the humor, the sadness, the tears that you are able to invoke in people that actually will drive change more than the logical part. You have the logical part down, but you got to do the other parts to make it happen. I love this quote from Darwin because I think it's not the strongest of the species that survive nor the most intelligent, but the one most adaptable to change, right? Another way to say it. Thank you very much. All right, I know lunch is already served probably, but so I'm happy to eat lunch or answer questions. But
I'm sure there are some questions. I think we've all learned a lot the last half hour. And who has a question? Or do you all want lunch?
Or you can talk to me at lunch.
When you make the small steps, how do you keep the end in mind? Because that's the most difficult part, I think. Because it's so easy to forget the end in mind and the end and the because it's about changing all the time, of course, in a lifetime of anesthesiology.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important for the folks, the leaders of the change management, to always keep the end in mind, and that periodically needs to be brought up. So it is, by 2025, remember our goal is out here. Here's what we're trying to do this year. Here's what we're trying to do this month. I think that's the way you keep doing it. You focus on the immediate steps in front on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-by-month basis, but every quarter, every year, you lay out the big plan so you don't forget it. And sometimes that changes a little bit, right? You have to evolve as well as you're going through the process, so it's okay to do that. I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question. But.
Hi. Great talk, and actually, I loved everyone's talk. It's wonderful the way it's all flown together. Really, it's beautiful. So one question I had is, there was the concept of you have patient-reported outcomes, and then there was the idea of, is that a process or an outcome? And then you have the flowing together with keep people updated and encouraged, so they want to go on with the initiative. So how do you balance that together? Because you can't really show impact for a process, but at the same time, people need to see results.
So I'm not sure what the question really is, so I'm going to try to, I'll just answer the question I want, or you can ask me again. But so you're talking about proms or ICHOM, like you want to get to a...
It's the question between, if you have a process and people want to see impact, how do you show something so that they want to go on?
Ah, good. So yeah, I got it. So at the end of the day, what we really care about is either the patient experience or the outcome or the safety measure you're looking at. But we often define it as small steps of process to get there. Is that fair to say? And so how do we show, as we're successful along the process, that it's actually making an impact? So I think the first thing is you have to really know up front if you believe that the first two process steps will actually make a difference or not. Right? Because sometimes those first two process steps only set you up for the third, fourth, and fifth, which are going to make the difference, right? And so you have to know that, and so don't make false claims up front. I think you can say that. I think you can say, our end point is that we are going to decrease, our infection rate on surgical sites by 25% by whatever year. The first two steps we're going to do is A and B, and all we're going to try to do is that, and then we're going to publicize those steps. Just say that those are the results we're going to show, and then you put them up there and say, we're 80% of the way there for this, and you don't even talk about that result part yet, because you can't, right? I think you just have to acknowledge that. Don't pretend, because I think you lose on that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, there's two more. I think the conference is really great. I feel like I learned a lot, and it would be, I hope that you continue to grow this and do this, because these always start small, and then they grow, and you get more and more people involved, and there's so much to talk about on the OB anesthesia front. I'd love to come and talk about OB anesthesia.
I had a question about this sense of urgency and the crisis, because it can be sometimes very attractive to exaggerate, and even if you don't, some other people will say that you are exaggerating. How to cope with that, because that can also be a very tough dynamic.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you have to be careful about the exaggeration piece. You have to actually find that burning platform. You have to actually find the reason to change and exploit that. If there really isn't a compelling reason to change, then you shouldn't be up there doing it, right? I think that is really, really important. You can't lie through this process. You have to be genuine. You have to be earnest. You have to really believe. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it. The challenge is that some people will not feel that because they're comfortable in their complacency. And what you need to do is you need to rock their boat a little bit. You need to make them uncomfortable. And sometimes it's the emotional stories. Sometimes it's the carrot or the stick that you can put in front of them. Sometimes it's everyone else is doing it, and I need you to come with me to do it, because it's going to be uncomfortable to be on the outside, right? That's the burning platform. But you're right, you can't exaggerate that. That would be dangerous.
One more question? Last question.
This seems like a perfect concept to make a change, and definitely you have lots of experience in seeing these processes. What does really make the difference between all the processes you have seen? What is the X factor to have success with all these, with the whole concept?
So that's the whole talk. You just, I really do think that, I think you have to really think about all of the steps, and I don't think you can skip them. I really don't. But if you wanted to pick, I would pick the two things that are the most important. I think the emotional piece, we often forget. The story part of that is really, really important. And we often, especially if you're scientific, I'm a math, computer science person, you think very logically and you lay out the logical argument and you think everyone should follow that. This is so logical. And it doesn't work that way. So that's, if you're going to do anything, think about the emotional component. Because I think oftentimes we put all the other pieces together, but we forget that. And then your team is really important. You have to have people that have titles. You have to have people that don't have titles. You have to have people that have influence. And then you have to have the spectrum of people in between.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, you have to have someone that organizes it all. But they don't necessarily have to have the leadership title, nor to be the influence maker. They have to be the organizer and understand the pieces that have to go into the change and push that.